what sets Chaos Horrific apart from like the other 15 albums in the discography?
Well, one of the big differences is just it was recorded more or less, before we had even started the tour cycle for Violence Unimagined.
Mm.
Just because, the pandemic obviously was a big, disruption for everybody in the music industry and all sorts of industries, of course. So we were in a position where we had an album coming out, Violence Unimagined, and didn't have any touring lined up for it. So we thought, let's just start writing right away, So that's one of the things that pops out to me is what's different about it. Well, it's different is that we started writing it really shortly after the one that came before it, and that's not something we'd normally do. And that may have changed a little bit of how we wrote for it. I think like we were just kind of already. We were the last album was still so fresh that we kind of knew not to repeat things that we did on that album. Mm-hmm. Like I feel like this one turned out sounding in a weird way like a continuation of the last one, but also different because we avoided repeating ourselves. It was easier to avoid than it would have been after having toured on the album for 2 to 3 years, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, I'm picking it up. Sorry, I was adjusting volumes as well.
Cool.
But yeah, one thing I definitely noticed about the beginning of the album is, something that's kind of, made fun of in death metal is the bass for, tracking and recording and stuff like that. But on this particular album, it comes out right away and kind of like sticks you right in the face. And obviously you're known for your, creative and ingenious ways of playing bass and showcasing bass. So, you're kind of one of the purveyors of like, bass in death metal, so it is a great way to start the record off, I should say.
Oh, thanks. I guess we hadn't really started a song with a bass intro in a little while, so it just seemed like something cool to do, and that song ended up being the one that just seemed like it should go first. Like if you listen to all the songs on the album, which when we go into the studio, we're not usually sure which song's going to be first, which one's going to be last, or whatever. We kind of figure that out later on in the recording, and so we didn't know that one was going to be first, but it ended up seeming right, and I'm happy that it starts out with a bass part. It's cool because I didn't write a whole lot of other bass lines that are jumping out at you on this album, so it's nice to get it in there early, I guess. I've had other albums that have a lot more bass features, but at least this one started off with one.
How do you guys go about, deciding that? Is it something that you decide, early on, like, I'm going to take a back seat on this particular one, or like, this is the album that I'm going to show everybody, like, what I can actually do in this form?
It's a song by song kind of thing. And then sometimes, like for bass playing anyway, just talking about like the bass lines I write, it'll be decided in the studio. For the title track of this album, I had written some kind of complicated bass parts for certain sections of it, and it just wound up feeling like they were going to detract. Even though they were kind of cool parts, but I'm like, you know what, let me just go more straightforward. Eric and I agreed that, Eric's our guitar player, but also our producer, and we agreed that straightforward approach would work for that part. So it's sort of a song by song thing. What's the song need? Sometimes we end up writing a bass line, in the studio where it's like, okay, this is something I hadn't intended to do here, but it just works. So yeah, we take it song by song, figure out what's appropriate. If I'm writing the song, I can kind of fit something in. But if it's one of the other guys' songs, I'm not going to be like, hey, okay, this is a great part you got here. I'm going to put a solo on top of that. How's that sound? Or whatever. I'm trying to do what they want and what would make their song sound the best when it's one of the songs they wrote.
Interesting. So when you guys, I know you have a studio where you live. Are you still out in Oregon currently?
Yes.
Okay, so I know you have like a studio out where you're at, and you recorded most of the stuff during COVID for the last album, in your place. Do you guys all like write separately, or and then just present it as a, like a completed song, or do you guys like share ideas around, and how has that differed? Because again, you guys have been around for 30 plus years. Like, how has that differed over the course of like how you began writing and how it is like now?
Oh, it's different. Like now it is really individual. You know, Rob will write songs alone, I'll write songs alone, Eric will write songs alone, and then we'll basically be presenting the finished song to the band in demo form most of the time. That's what happens. But in the old days, a lot of times we didn't even think of the riff until we were all together.
Yeah.
You know, so it was really organic back then. You can kind of hear too how some of those songs meander. If you listen to our first few albums, there's some songs where it's like they have a whole ton of riffs. There's not much repetition because we were just kind of building it little by little in the practice room. And that gradually changed over time to where, by maybe probably around the fifth album or so, it was mostly, individual writers. It just seemed to be a more coherent way to make a song. It's kind of fun though, and it's something I actually think about sometimes. Like maybe we should do at least one song that way again, where one guy does a riff and then the next guy does a riff, and then and just see where it takes us and see if it's good or not.
Yeah.